The Chukchi's ancestors had followed the reindeer eastwards. After thousands of years, they ended up here at the eastern tip of Russia. But they couldn't go any further and were forced to make this inhospitable corner of the world their home.